What's up, everyone? It's Walter, your favorite historian, educated professor, and social studies extraordinaire. Today's date is June 20th, 2026. So everyone is familiar with the Titanic, a legend in her own time and sense. But did you know that she had two sisters, the Olympic and the Britannic? These were the three Olympic-class ocean liners designed by the famous White Star Line shipping company in the early 20th century. White Star Line was, of course, a British mega giant, all right, in the shipping industry, and remained one until she was consolidated with her competitor, the Cunard Line, in the 1930s. So each of the Olympic-class vessels, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic, were all built from the same base design, but each had its own particular features that differentiated it from its other sisters. Now, with respect to their common denominators, each of these ships had the same length, 882.9 feet, the same draft depth, 34 feet and 7 inches, and height, 175 feet. They also had identical engine types and boiler configuration. Of the three sisters, only the Olympic, the first one constructed, the original, would go on to a long and successful and illustrious career. Olympic was launched in May of 1910 and remained in active service until she was retired in April of 1935, which followed with her dismantling in October of 1935 and final hull demolition in September of 1937. Much of her luxurious interior fixtures were auctioned off and installed in new settings, so the Olympic still lives on very much today, though just repurposed. Okay? On her retirement, she had sailed nearly 2 million miles over the course of her career. Indeed, she was old faithful with respect to the White Star Line Olympic-class ships. Next was the Titanic, the one everyone has heard of, all right? Titanic was launched in May of 1911, and she set sail on her maiden voyage on April 10th, 1912, from Southampton, England. Of course, we know very well that en route to New York City, on that famous maiden voyage, she struck an iceberg on the evening of April 14th, 1912, and sank in the early morning hours of April 15th, 1912, 2:40 a.m. approximately. As such, she had the shortest lifespan of the three Olympic-class sisters. But she was the most famous of the three, and the Titanic disaster in April of 1912 certainly led to a broad series of reforms in maritime safety. Sad to say, it always takes tragedy to bring about reforms, and the Titanic disaster is really what brought significant updates in international maritime law. One of the most significant reforms, of course, being that these liners had to have enough lifeboats for everyone on board, something that obviously, as we know, Titanic did not. Okay? And last but not least, the youngest sister, the HMHS Britannic, which was launched on February 26, 1914. When Titanic sunk, Britannic was still under construction. And as a result of the Titanic disaster, modifications were inputted on Britannic while she was still in dry dock being constructed in famous shipyard in Belfast. So she was given a double hull, which increased her width to 94 feet as opposed to the 92 feet like her sisters. She also received raised bulkheads and additional enclosures and a larger, more powerful turbine engine. Also, unlike her sisters, Britannic was requisitioned for military service during the First World War and thus was never utilized as a passenger liner. Her maiden voyage took place in December 1915. Thanks to the war, she would operate entirely, her entire time sailing as a hospital ship, painted in new livery and everything else. And it is interesting enough, she would be used in that capacity to transport wounded and sick soldiers back home. So on the 21st of November 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, the ship struck a German mine and would subsequently sink after only 55 minutes. 55 minutes, and there are loads of reasons why that sinking happened so quickly, including it continuing to sail after striking the mine, thus leading more water to come in, a failure of several compartments to close thanks to damage from the mines, and lots of other reasons, more covered in the specific video on the Britannic. But like the Titanic wreck, it still lasts today and is quite visible with deep sea diving. So Ultimately, the only one remaining standing after the First World War was the original, like I said, the RMS Olympic. Like I said, that continued to be in active service with the White Star Line until she was retired in 1935. Okay, the flagship, the oldest sister, and the standard bearer. Now, I've often said that if only economic situations were possible, the Olympic quite possibly could have been saved as a museum ship. Can you imagine how much money that would make today if the Olympic had been saved and people could actually tour it and get the impression of being on the legendary Titanic, her younger sister? Because essentially, like I said, these ships looked identical to the naked eye, but they all had their own specific modifications. But the interiors, at least at the time the Titanic was launched, were practically identical. All right, only the decks coverings were different, A deck specifically. So one could definitely get that image and preview of being on the Titanic, something, a ship that has captured the imaginations and the minds of millions. Some, 114 years after she met her tragic end on the night of April 15th, 1912. So that's the story of the 3 Olympic class ships of the very famous and historic White Star Line. I hope you've enjoyed this tale. If you have any questions or controversies, leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next video. Professor Shelton, the Blue Collar Scholar and Historian, out. Peace.